Previously, we explained how classical fencing teaches you to value truth over self-interest. I submit that it also teaches you a thing or two about how to find the truth. Now, very few people are familiar with classical fencing and the way a foil contest is organized. Almost no one does it like this anymore. But you have to understand the setup in order to get the punchline. So I'm going to have to give you a crash course. This isn't the sexy part, so I'll try to be brief. Buckle up, here we go. A classical fencing contest, called a bout, requires 7 people. 2 fencers fencing, 4 judges judging, 1 président de combat. No partridge, no pear tree. Each of the 7 people in this group, called a pool, will fence a bout with each of the others. When they're not on the strip fencing, there will be a judge or président de combat, also called director. Now, the job of the 2 fencers is to hit without being hit. The job of the 4 judges is to determine the materiality of the hit. The job of the director is to determine the priority of the hit. This illustration shows the placement of these 7 participants. The 2 fencers, Mr. Red and Mr. Blue, come on guard about 4 meters apart, far enough away that they're both out of distance. The 2 blue judges watch Mr. Blue's point to see if at any time it clearly and distinctly fixes against Mr. Red's body, with sufficient penetration that it causes Blue's blade to bend slightly. The 2 red judges watch Mr. Red's point to see if at any time it clearly and distinctly fixes against Blue's body, with sufficient penetration that it causes Red's blade to bend slightly. The président de combat, also called the director, positions himself in the center between the 2 fencers, an equidistance from both of them, and far enough back that he can also see the judges in his peripheral vision. The fencers are free to fence in any manner they please within the rules. As they move up and down the strip, the judges and the director must move with them to maintain the best visual perspective for fulfilling their duties. Now, whenever a judge sees a hit, he must immediately and clearly raise his hand. Immediately upon seeing a hand go up, the director must call halt. Immediately upon the command halt, the fencers must stop, step back, and lower their points to the floor. The président then analyzes the phrase immediately preceding the raising of the hand, and he announces his analysis loudly and clearly. Analyzing the phrase is simply identifying what offensive actions occurred and when in the sequence of actions they occurred. The critical part is to identify the attack. The attack is the first offensive action in the sequence. This is known as calling the phrase. The director then polls the judges to determine whether there was a hit at any time during the sequence of actions making up the phrase. The judges will each vote independently on the materiality of the hit. They may vote yes, which means I definitely saw a hit on the target. They may vote no, which means I definitely saw that there was no hit at all. They may vote off target, which means I definitely saw a hit, but it was not on the designated target area. Because foil fencing represents a duel to the death, the target is limited to the torso. Now, it's also possible that the judge, for any number of reasons, is uncertain of the hit. In that case, the judge must abstain. So those are the 4 things a judge can say: yes, no, off target, abstain. Now, each judge gets 1 vote. The président gets 1.5 votes. If the judges disagree, the director may overrule one of them. But if the judges agree, they overrule the director. Some people might call that a balance of power. As the director, I'm watching the flow of the exchange between the 2 fencers. I'm not watching for touches. That is, I'm watching the action of their blades, not their bodies. So I might be in a position where I happen to see a hit, but most of the time, the judges are in a better position to do that, and that's all they have to focus on. And that's why we have them. Let's take a very simple phrase and see how this works. After the command fence, the fencer on my right makes a thrust and a lunge, and one of the judges raises his hand. Halt. The attack is from my right, nothing from the left. I ask the first judge, the attack. He votes yes. I ask the other judge, the attack. He votes yes. 1 + 1 = 2. Even if I disagree, I only have 1.5 votes. I can't overrule the judges. Touch against my left. On guard, ready. Fence. Let's take another example. Same situation. After the command fence, the fencer on my right makes a thrust and a lunge. This time, one judge votes yes, the other judge votes no or abstain. Now in this case, if I have an opinion, I can agree with one judge and overrule the other. If I have no opinion, a yes and a no vote cancel each other out and there is no touch. But a yes and an abstain is different. Abstain counts as 0. So the judge with the definite opinion will prevail. Let's take one last example. Same situation. After the command fence, the fencer on my right makes a thrust and a lunge. This time, neither of the judges raises a hand, but the fencer on my left calls out touché, meaning I have been hit. And the fencer on my right replies, merci, thank you. Now here's the thing. In classical fencing, fencers always call hits against themselves. But the jury, that's the judges and the director, are bound to render an independent verdict. In the absence of an opinion from the judges, and if the director has no opinion, the director simply says, merci, monsieur, and awards the touch against the fencer who acknowledged it. Now, there are all kinds of phrases and a zillion more details and such like, but I think that's enough to give you the general idea. Here's why all this is important. When you're judging, you have to decide whether there's a hit or not. How do you decide? Well, that's easy. Either you definitely saw it, or you didn't. You only decide based on what you actually saw happen. Clearly, objectively, strictly according to well-defined criteria, and without a shadow of a doubt. You must see the point clearly fixed against the target, and you must see the blade sufficiently bend. You have to see both things. You can't assume the point fixed just because the blade bends. You have to be absolutely certain of what you saw. You don't guess. You don't decide based on what you think might have happened. You don't decide based on what you think probably happened. You don't decide based on what you think must have happened. You don't decide based on what you think at all. You decide based on what you know, and only on what you know. Out in the world, we call that critical thinking. Now, human beings are fallible, so it's possible that a judge can make a mistake. It is only an opinion, but it's a highly educated one, and not just wild speculation, or based on which fencer the judge happens to like or dislike. Now, when you're the président du combat, you have to decide what happened in the big picture, who did what to whom and when. So, you position yourself in a neutral position, evenly between the two fencers, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too. You must have no preference for one fencer or the other. You must be able to act without bias, without prejudice, without favoritism. In the course of a phrase, there can be a lot of giddy-up, bang-bang going on between the two fencers. It can be fast, it can be heated, it can get frenzied. It can be full of sound and fury, and yet signify nothing. Your job isn't to describe all this action. Your job is to analyze the action. You have to filter out everything irrelevant and distill all that noise down to its simplest components. Point in line, attack, parry, riposte, counter-riposte, counterattack, remise. You learn to look for and recognize the signatures of those actions and know how they interplay in time. If the fencers should lose their minds and the fray starts to devolve into a frantic jabbing contest, you halt the bout, separate the fencers, and have them start again. It's not your job to be the referee in a shouting match. You must require the fencers to conform to the highest standards and practices of this art and science. You require them to make their arguments clearly and rationally and in accordance with the rules. Now, when you're fencing under these conditions, you know that only clear, distinct, correct actions will be counted. Your job is to compose yourself, to stay cool, to fight rationally, logically, and correctly. You make your best argument, and it will rise or fall on its own merits and nothing else. Now, I think the beauty of these lessons is that it's all organic. You learn it in the process of participation. It becomes a habit you acquire during the pursuit of excellence. And then it seems so natural that you can't imagine doing it any other way. Now, nobody beats you over the head with this. Nobody forces you to do anything. You're free to make choices. And then you learn that choices have consequences. And that's a very important lesson, too. My teacher, Mr. Logan, used to say, life is a simplified form of fencing. He said if you practice the sword and do it right and do it well, it can teach you a lot of things about a lot of things. I guess I'd have to agree with that.